Hi, I'm Will Bruin, and I was just recognized as a Seattle Sounders legend. Now I get to do voice reads for the Sounder at Heart Podcast Network.
Here we go. Come on! Hey, O'Shan! Let's go!
The Seattle Sounders have done it! MLS Cup winners!
Here comes Rui Diaz through the middle to crown it for Seattle!
The Sounders rule the region!
Seattle Sounders is campeón! All creatures great and small!
¡De la Vega! ¡No me pongo de pie! ¡De rodillas!
You know, what was the thought process in terms of who you decided to use and who you didn't?
Ever since Sounder at Heart wrote a commentary that we didn't take Gold Cup seriously.
This episode of Nos Arietes is sponsored by Full Pull Wines, a Seattle-based wine retailer and proud sponsor of Nos Arietes since 2011. Full Pull was founded in 2009, is based in Seattle, and is owned and operated by longtime Sounders supporters. They offer the best boutique wines of the world to members of their mailing list, with special focus on their home, the Pacific Northwest. Welcome back to Nos Arietes on the Sounder at Heart Podcast Network. I am Jeremiah O'Shan. We are at Longacres. We just got finished with the end of season press conference with Craig Weibel and Brian Schmetzer, and I am joined by Niko Moreno for, I guess, we're going to call this maybe the last episode of what we learned this week, because I don't know what we have to call it that. Anyway, Niko, welcome to the show. Welcome back.
Thank you. And I think it's fair to call it, because what we'll learn from here on out would be more based on an opinion than observations. And I feel like that's the premises of our show.
Good job there, identifying what our show is, because I had a hard time identifying that. But that is a good, this is based on our observations, and this is something that we can share our observations from. And it was, I would say, a particularly unnewsy press conference. It was like almost 40 minutes. There wasn't a lot revealed. Maybe the most authoritative thing that the Sounders, I guess there's two main takeaways. One is they seem very confident in the group that they're bringing back. They have 22 players coming back. We can run through the list of who's leaving and who's coming. But as of today, they have 22 players under contract for 2026 and a lot beyond. And they feel pretty good about the group that they're bringing back. I would go as far to say that based on today, the distinct impression I got was that the starting lineup on first kick will probably, I would give it maybe a 75 to 80% chance, be made up of players that are currently on the roster today.
And I believe that when you truthfully and honestly look into the season and you are not hyperbolic about the way the season ended, it's a fair approach. I would say it's a coherent approach to what I think this team needs to build on. Do I think that there's places that there is a need to maybe get a little help? Absolutely. And there's definitely room for improvement. But I think both you and I know that going into next season, with the exception of Pedro de la Vega, who is clearly not going to be available till about April, the starting 11 is pretty much there. Another one that could be pending is what happens with Obed.
I mean, there's variables there. And I'm not saying it's this exact same starting lineup from the last game, but like Obed's replacement is probably already on the roster.
True.
Pedro de la Vega's replacement is probably already on the roster, at least as far as the season opening goes. And that, this time last year, if I remember correctly, or not this time, but when we had this press conference last year, they were already well down the road of the Jesus Ferreira trade. And they were talking openly about we need to add offensive firepower. They clearly had an open DP spot. there was a lot of things that were a lot of question marks that were going into last offseason that are just not here. And that doesn't, again, like you said, it's not that they can't improve. It's just that they feel secure in the group they have.
And that has been something that I feel, if you're a Sounder fan or if you're just a fan of MLS, you have to, in sorts of ways, give the Sounders credit and give them the benefit of the doubt that that's the right way to success, because they have done a lot, and it has been proven that through their academy and through Tacoma Defiance, they've been able to bring in players to fill in spots to be successful. Today, Craig Weibel talked about Osasa de Rosario being a guy that they felt like by sitting on that U22 spot that they were hoping to go out there and get, let's say, abroad. By not doing that and allowing a guy like Osasa de Rosario to get more minutes to see what you get out of him, maybe that was the best move. And he sounded like,
I mean, he was he almost was taking a victory lap on him.
He was.
That was the closest thing he came to being sort of like pounding his chest. He was like, it was a good thing we didn't make that signing because it allowed Osase to sort of show that he, and to his credit, it's easy to sit here and say that in some ways, but they deserve some credit.
They do.
If the Sounders had, and we kind of were saying this at the time, if they had signed players who produced the way that Osase and Snyder Brunel did, and they were coming from abroad, I think there would have been a lot more excitement. There would be no questions about are they willing to spend, and because they would have obviously spent. But they, those were both players. I think performed at a much higher level than you would have expected a random U22 to come in and perform at off the bat.
Absolutely. And this all goes into clearly providing, depth, providing a guy that's going to, push for more minutes. And the reality of a question that you asked that I thought was spot on is the lack of flexibility that this team has when it comes to the cab to go out there and make major changes.
Right.
That's why, I find it laughable that I have heard some people talked about in other places in the universe of this MLS content creation is that the Sounders next season is pivotal. There's some big changes coming. None of that is true, and all of that is actually almost delusional because the Sounders have no flexibility. There's no upcoming big contracts that are going to end. There's no indicators that tell you anything other than this team is going to be, like you said, 80% the same because of the season that they were having, because of the success that they found, because of the core group of the players that they have put together. This is an 86-goal team, the best they've ever had. This is a one-loss at home team that you need to continue to build on. So there's all of these components that clearly tell you that you have to build from what you have within right now.
And it would be one thing if we were talking about them bringing back the same roster because they just didn't have the creativity or the money or whatever else. But the reality is that they had a good season last year. They were very close to getting out. That maybe undersells it. They should have gotten out of the first round. And I don't know that there's any number of moves they could have made that would have ensured a better result, because where they failed against Minnesota was in areas where no one was really talking about trying to improve this team. They gave up two, we've said this a million times, but it bears repeating. The difference between them advancing and them getting knocked out was giving up 2 set-piece goals when you were up a man, and then missing 2 penalties when you had a chance to clinch. Those are that's not about a particular player failing to deliver. I mean, Jordan Morris came through and scored one of the most clutch goals of his career, 88-minute goal equalizer on the road to send it into penalties. I don't know that you could have put anyone. You can't put Sungmin Hong on the roster and say, oh, he's going to do better. Oh, by the way, guess who missed his penalty in the in the shootout? By the way, but it's and so I think it's one thing to say that you want them to make change. Totally fair. We all like new things. It's another thing to say they have to make changes, because I just don't know that they have. I don't see any reason why they have a bunch of young guys coming up. They have a bunch of veterans who are not too old, like that are very much in the prime of their career. This is a team that has both the present and even some of the future in a good position. This is not a bad position to be working from.
And again, look, I will die on the hill, and I hope that people find my honesty what it is. And all I want to do is be a voice of clarity. It's very easy to panic and to paint everything with this shed brush. I could say that word.
Yeah, sure.
Because the team lost. But the reality is that there's a lot of things that the Sounders are doing well. And this season was the perfect example. Look at what Kalani Casariense was able to come in and do, and the way he was able to perform, and the way he was able to be a contributor. Look at Georgie Manungu's development and growth and the ability that I think he has. He's someone that I feel like if there's a question is how many more minutes can we give this guy, in on the wing. You have guys like Snyder Burnell that today Brian talked about, not just his IQ, but the way that he crashes the box and the goals that he got. You got a guy like Danny Leyva that I have said in several shows in the Sounder Our Heart podcast network that he's a guy that I feel like is ready to take on Obid's role once Obid leaves. So you have to give him the benefit of the doubt because the proof is in the pudding, and the proof is last season. I
would totally agree with that. And it was, it's funny, the one player that we didn't really talk about at the press conference and maybe is the glaring player that was, and you mentioned was Georgie Manungu. Here's a player who on a per minute basis was as productive as just about anyone. And he is poised for, there's a lot of talk about, what are they going to do with Pedro de la Vega out for the first couple months of the season? And, we don't know what Paul Arriola's condition is going to be. And we don't know if Paul Rothrock is going to be back. Those are all legitimate questions, but it's not like where what it does is it opens up a real opportunity for Georgie to get minutes. And this is a player who I think anyone who watches him play for just 10 or 15 minutes can see why you would want to see him get more minutes and why you would want to be excited. Like, I'm genuinely excited about the prospect of him maybe opening the season with a real shot to establish himself.
Yeah, and there's the Paul Arriola possibility. Then eventually in April-ish, you'll get Pedro back. That's maybe a position where, you could also add other guys onto that attacking end. Someone like Reed Baker-Whiting. I think that the team is currently looking for a left back or wing back, depending on what they're hoping to do next season. So I feel like that's a place where you could add some depth, and you could maybe make Reed Baker-Whiting more of a full-on winger. So there's just a lot of ways to fulfill those positions. Now, again, I'm not sitting here telling you that I feel like this team should go into next season and do absolutely nothing. I think that there will be some acquisitions, but I just want to create a real expectation with
set a baseline.
Set a baseline. That's beautifully put. A baseline that is founded with some real insight and some true knowledge of the game and what the way things are done within the Sounders. So all of you out there listening to this aren't expecting Mbappé to be here next season. I hope that none of you are, but there just seems to be, this small group of people that believe that that's what's needed to win. And if the Sounders have done anything, even when I've doubted them, which was like 2 years ago when I looked at the roster and I was like, that's tough. They've been able to get to a Western Conference final. And this year, again, you just mentioned it, regardless of the way you went out and it was disappointing, you have to take the body of work. You have to take what they were able to do in Leagues Cup and understand that there is a potential for this team to, in my opinion, go out there and be a top 3 team in the West.
Yeah, we just off the mics, we were talking about what does this team need to do to level up. And the thing is that within the constraints of what they have, I don't know that and I think this is a frustrating answer. There is not an easy way. There is not an obvious thing that you can say. And I'm sure a lot of people will say, well, go out and get a true number 9. I hear that all the time. And I'm not going to discount the possibility that you can upgrade from Jordan Morris. But I think we also have to be realistic about how hard it is to upgrade from Jordan Morris. It's not that easy to go from a player who does all the things that Jordan does well to someone who's going to fit in seamlessly. Now, if the Sounders had an unlimited budget, that would probably be a position that they would try to upgrade from. Because theoretically, you could move Jordan Morris on, open up that spot, and then go sign, like, for lack of a better player, a Peter Musa, a player,
right.
a player who is likely vaguely available if you have the money, who you know can perform in MLS. Could you bring him in, and would you feel like you have upgraded the roster? You would. You'd feel that way. Would that guarantee any better performance? No, I don't think it would do that either.
No, of course not. And I always go with the way clubs do business. When was the last time that the Sounders moved on from a DP, whether it's through a sell or transaction? What, Oba maybe? It might be one.
I would say Oba is the only player the only DP in recent memory that they've moved on from prematurely, for lack of a better term. Where they just said he is not performing at the level we need. You know, like Niko and Raul, for all intents and purposes, retired as DP.
Correct.
Like they didn't literally retire, but
they moved on.
They moved on in ways that are the natural end cycle of their time. You would have same thing. Clint Dempsey basically moved on once his playing cycle was over. Trying to think who would have been before that, and I guess Oba would probably be the one before that. And then sure, before Oba, there was like a litany of players who they bought out and they sort of got out of for, earlier on. But for the modern era of MLS, they just is not what they do. They do not move on from a Jordan Morris, especially if he's performing. I've seen people suggest that they should move on from Albert Rusnak. He's coming off 2 straight almost best 11 quality years. I'm not quite sure how much better you think anyone's going to be. Is he the best number 10 in the league? No, but to upgrade from Albert is not an easy task. Like Evander maybe is an upgrade.
Sure. I mean, you go get me Martino Hayda. Maybe. And even then, the stats don't quite put it together. And again, I'm not a full stats guy. I really am not. But I think a lot of people do like to see stats. And if you put his stats compared to Martino Hayda, they're not far off. Now, when it comes to the eye test, I think this is his best season just recently because of the work rate, because of the defensive output, because of his progression, dribbling on the ball. I thought that there were moments that Albert Rusnak was truly being a guy that was a pillar of that offense. So with that and the acquisition of Ferreira, who I cannot praise enough because of the versatility he had this season and how effective he was, I've told a lot of people, I think that he's still getting better. And I think that next season he'll be even better than this season. And you should be able to bet on that rather than having to go out there and move on from your biggest pieces of your salary, right? It's your 3 DPs and it's Ferreira. That's your 4 most valuable players. And again, if this was another club, perhaps you move on from Pedro and you take a loss on that because you're not going to get much for him, and you go and replace him with another South American player of the likes of Silvetti in Inter Miami. But that's just not in the card. So why would we even think about that?
Yeah, and I would say this also: if you're looking for how do the Sounders get better next year? Well, the good news is that there's a lot of players who have better production. You mentioned Jesus Ferreira. It's not hard to imagine him improving on next year. You can say, oh well, Danny Masovsky had a career year. Can he really expect to repeat that? No, he probably can't. But who you can expect to pick up the load? Jordan Morris. Yep. You can probably expect Osaze de Rosario to improve. If Pedro de la Vega picks up anywhere close to where he left off, this will probably be a better season than he had last year. Paul Arriola looked like he was a man on fire before he got hurt. If by mid-season he is playing anything close to what he was playing with at the beginning of last year, that's another area for improvement. Okay, you're going to maybe you lose Paul Rothrock. Georgie Manungu could probably pick up that production. You can go down the list, and there's a lot of reasons to believe that the Sounders can get better, even without having to dramatically upgrade the roster. That does not mean that we don't want to see players come in. There are about 9 open roster spots right now. Some of those will be filled internally. I wouldn't be at all surprised if someone like Yusu Kanome signs, or Peter Kingston, or Antino Lopez. There's definitely some candidates for players to come in. They're going to have to sign some goalkeepers. They're down to 1 goalkeeper right now. That's the most glaring area where they can add some depth. It might be Stephen Fry, might be one of them. But there are, again, this is not to say that they can't upgrade. It's just that the need to upgrade from the external parts of the roster are not as pressing as I think some might think. And the overall message from the Sounders was be prepared for that.
Yeah, I think that if there are some places where I feel like I look at what is available, I think left back is somewhere where I would like to get help in. I think that right winger, like a down the line right winger, would be a good addition to this team. You're likely going to lose Paul Rothrock. I don't see that going any other way. You're clearly lost Ryan Kent. He's obviously more of a left-sided guy.
That was maybe just to hang on that. The one thing that they said sort of like newsy, Ryan Kent gone. Like they effectively, I think he literally said the door is closed on Ryan Kent's return.
Yep, he said that there's not going to be a role for him next season. I don't know how true that is, and again, that could be an indication of how highly they are under wingers. But I also, and he would never say this, of course, it was probably have to do with the salary and the compensation that you probably would need to give him to keep him here. Yeah. But look, it's not like I'm upset about it. I knew that he was gone. I wasn't necessarily advocating to bring him back. It was more of a Hail Mary, the way he was brought in, and it didn't quite hit a touchdown. It was okay. It was good. Yeah. It was interesting. It was fun. Yeah, it was fun. And I think if they could have brought him back, they probably would have at the right price. But that's just kind of the way it went. So that's why right winger, I feel like getting a different profile right winger is somewhere where I could see them getting some help in. Because I do know that they like Kozariansi higher as well, but he's a different profile.
No, he's much more of a sort of he's like the right-sided version of Reed.
Correct.
Like more of a player you bring in to sort of lock the game down a little bit as a winger. Otherwise, he can be a wing back or he can be a right back. Same thing with Reed. Reed is another player who I think has some real upside potential for next year. I think there is a chance that he'll displace Nuhu. You've mentioned this before, that there's a chance that Nuhu gets moved somewhere else in the league. I don't know how likely that is. It seems like the Sounders have tried that before and it hasn't quite come off. But I don't know. I'm not stressing, I guess, about the state of the roster. I feel genuinely pretty good about it. Among the players who we might see more minutes from next year, who do you think you're most excited about?
Repeat the question again.
Among the younger players who we're likely to see more from next year, who do you think you're most excited about?
That's a tough question because we don't want to go chalk and go Georgie, and I don't know if he qualifies as young, right?
I mean, I think he would, but we've already talked about him.
We already talked about him.
Interesting to talk about him.
Yeah, I think Stu Hawkins.
Oh, interesting.
I think Stu Hawkins simply because I feel like he is the future of the position to a certain extent. I think that if the Sounders are going on business, you probably continue to develop and get Jackson Reagan to be this really, really good center back. And if there's a market for him, maybe you cash in on that if there's a person that can take that role on. And I feel like that's two. And I'm high in it because of the overall fit of the player. I think he has the right mentality. I think athletically he's great. The the growth physically for me was a question mark, and he has fixed that. I mean, he's
filled out.
He's filled out. He's just so much more muscular. He looks like a center back. So when you add that with his ability on the ball, his IQ, his ability to put in breaking passes, I'm just excited to see him get more minutes. You could go with the, Kalani Kosariense. He's fun, but he was fun this season.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I almost feel like Kalani, like there's not a lot of untapped upside at this point with Kalani. He played 1,700 minutes. He had 3 goals. He had 2 assists. Is he gonna he could have a very good year next year and not upgrade on what he did? Because Alex seems to be the right back for now, so it's not very likely that Kalani is going to see a lot more playing time than he had this year. I guess the player who I really am intrigued by, and you've mentioned already, is Danny Leyva. And it's funny to think of him as a young player, but he's 22. He's going into his 8th or 9th MLS season, which is wild to say. And he is someone who I think maybe for the first time in his career is going to start preseason with a realistic expectation of having a defined role. You can go through before this year, I think his career high in minutes was his first season. And that was he kind of came out of a little bit out of nowhere. And he, this year, I think showed a maturity. He showed a flexibility. He was both a backup for Albert Rusnak. He ably played in that double pivot. And, he's in some ways, I don't think he's a defensive midfielder necessarily, but he could pair with Christian really effectively, I think. And I don't see any reason why, if Obed gets moved, why Danny Leyva shouldn't get the first chance to soak up those minutes. And I'm really bullish on what that could look like.
Thank you for listening to the Sounder at Heart podcast network, which now includes No Sarietes, Lobbing Scorchers, and the Cooler Guild. Although this podcast is free, it's only made possible through our paid subscribers. Plans start as low as $30 a year and allow us to remain independent and mostly ad-free. Subscribers get access to all our written and podcast content, including a full-text RSS feed and a mostly ad-free podcast feed that includes every show in one spot. If you really like what we're doing, though, I'd encourage you to sign up at our higher tiers, which include all sorts of various perks. The most popular of those is our members-only Discord, where the real Sounders sickos hang out. I know I've called this group the smartest, funniest, and best-informed Sounders fans in the world, but it's more than the rough equivalent of a Sounders Mensa meeting. Discord is where we make things happen, like for real. You know the promotion the Sounders ran that offered fans the opportunity to trade in their Messi jersey for a Paul Rothrock one? That originated in our community. You'll not only be the first to know about stuff, but you also have a semi-direct line to the movers and shakers at the Sounders organization. If you want to be one of the totally normal people who occupy the Sounder at Heart Discord, just become a supporter of Sounder at Heart. Anyway, thanks for listening, and go Durs. No Sarietes, admittedly, is not exactly known for our spicy takes, but that doesn't mean we want our food to be mild. Spice up your life with Haxon Ferments. Handcrafted in Georgetown and made with the best local ingredients from across the Pacific Northwest, they specialize in unique small batch fermented hot sauces and vinegars. Haxon Ferments brings bold flavors and natural fermentation together for something truly special. Whether you're a heat seeker or just looking to elevate your cooking, you'll find something you love at haxonferments.com. That's HAXANFERMENTS.com. And right now, if you use the code SOUNDERATHEART, that's all one word, at checkout, you will get a free hot sauce with your order. Again, go to haxonferments.com, use the code SOUNDERATHEART at checkout for a free hot sauce with your order. Haxon Ferments is a proud sponsor of the Sounder at Heart podcast network.
I'm excited too. I definitely feel like I don't see him as a young player because he's been here so long.
Yeah.
So long. But he's absolutely, he fits in the young category.
I mean, it's funny to think that, 10 years ago, he would have been the same age as like rookies.
Yeah.
That's not really the way it works anymore. But like if he had gone to college, he would barely be coming out of college right now.
Yeah, and I feel like he's the one player that hasn't had his moment to shine, right? There was an Obed moment. There was a Josh Atencio moment. There has been, and it sounds crazy, a Snyder moment because he came in and scored some goals and people were super high on him. But I don't think that people see the full potential of Danny Leyva because they're not really out here. They don't,
it's a little like, we've got Danny Leyva at home kind of syndrome,
Yes, true, very, very true, very true. There's Danny Leyva at home. There's no need to go out there and look for any other. No, 100%. So I am excited to see him take on the responsibility and see him step into that role, and that can change a lot of the way he plays. That could add on. He's always had a chip on his shoulder where, it's like, when is it going to be my time? I feel like when they give him that position, he's not going to waste it. He's not going to waste that chance. And between his set piece ability, I still think that he's the best passer on the team when it comes to through balls.
Yeah.
And as he continues to develop his mid-range shot, I do believe that he's going to be a guy that can fit in and maybe not play that pivot position to the level of Obed Vargas immediately, but I think that he can grow and be very close to it in terms of just the execution of the way they play.
Yeah. I mean, there's going to be some, he's not as physical as Obed. Obed has some tools that Danny doesn't have.
Yep.
Obed breaks. He has escapability, I like to call it. Like he has ability to dribble out of trouble the way, and probably to a better degree than Danny. But Danny also is, I think, a much better long passer.
Absolutely.
He's much better. He's much more likely to hit that through ball. He's much more likely to deliver.
His vision is definitely there. I would say at a higher level than Obed. Now, Obed's clearly a generational talent, and I've said this over and over again.
Yeah,
anytime that you move on from a generational talent, you're clearly not going to get exactly that. But what this team has shown us this season is that they can slide in players to play certain positions, and the effectiveness of the system allows them to be successful. And I feel like he can come in and you won't see that big of a change on the way the team ticks on the field.
Yeah, it's funny. You can go back to, I want to say it was 2015 when Garth Logaway was first here, and he was talking about how his aspiration was for the Sounders to have a plug-and-play system where you could lose a Clint Dempsey or an Obafemi Martins, and you're not going to necessarily replace them perfectly, but your system allows you to play through that. And I think that they are finally at that point where they have players who are maybe not exact replicas of the player that they're playing behind, but they allow the collective allows them to stay at a high level and to sort of move into that. And I feel like that's kind of what they're talking about today. We asked specifically about going out and signing a U22, and this was the sort of the one moment where Craig was, I guess I talked about this before. He almost took a victory lap of saying how aren't we lucky we didn't sign someone because it worked out so well. But more than that, I think it indicated that they are not in any rush to go out and sign a U22 this summer. Now, that would seem like a prudent thing to do. We know they have some cash. They have a lot of money that they did not spend in terms of winnings last year. There is, they got $8 million from the Club World Cup. They got probably $1 million from the Leagues Cup. There's cash if they wanted to tap into it. Ownership, of course, has to make that available. It does not look like they're making that available. But more than that, Craig is still kind of pounding this drum. I think it's not the most exciting thing, but I understand where he's coming from. They aren't going to go sign a U22 just to sign a U22. If they're going to sign a U22, they want that player to be contributing meaningfully to the front. They're not looking to bring in a project. And they gave absolutely no indication that they are going to sign that player this winter.
And that might sound unambitious. And ambition is a word that I have a really hard time processing without context, because I feel like certainly in the sports world, in Spanish media, it uses this cliche to the point that it drives me nuts when people use it, because ambition doesn't necessarily mean winning or success. All ambition means is that you're willing to swing for the fences. But just because you swing for the fences doesn't mean that you hit a homer. Right. It means that you strike out. It means that you don't do your job. And sometimes it's better to get a base hit to just get on base. But that ambition can go one or two ways. It could absolutely get you closer to the objective quicker, or it could just tear you down. And the Sounders have made it a mythology, a way of doing business in not the opposite direction, but not being ambitious, but being safe, being successful, understanding where they need to bring in players. I think that the most ambitious team I've covered since I started doing this is Inter Miami. And what have they got to show for it? Absolutely nothing yet. They got one Leagues Cup. The Sounders just won one with a different way of doing business. So that is exactly what shows you that ambition doesn't equate to wins.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can argue the Portland Timbers showed a lot of ambition this year.
True.
They got absolutely nothing to show for it. I think you can argue that Atlanta United was maybe the most ambitious team
this year. Absolutely.
They had nothing to show for it. They almost won the wooden spoon. I think you can argue FC Cincinnati had as much ambition as anyone this year. They are in essentially the same situation that the Sounders are in. You can kind of go down the list. And yeah, Miami's in a good place right now. But they are, so we'll see. But ambition is not any more of a guarantee of success than a sound process. And the Sounders do seem, it's not sexy, but there is a sensible process in place. And if you are primarily interested in winning games, and the Sounders seem to be primarily interested in winning games, it's hard to argue sort of with that process because it's leading to a lot of success, even if it isn't the absolute most success that any team has ever had. Would it be more fun if they were a little bit more ambitious? Yeah, that frankly.
Sure.
It would be a lot
for
of
us.
fun.
It'd be fun.
It would
be
a lot of fun. And so I don't want to begrudge anyone for wishing that they were more outwardly ambitious than they have been. But I also think we need to sometimes pump the brakes a little bit on our frustrations and saying things like we can't compete when they very clearly are.
Or we need to blow it up and change it. Right. And all of this, unnecessary radical opinions rather than just looking at the product and understanding that there's room for improvement. But what you have is pretty good. Compare it around the league. Compare it absolutely anywhere. And you will see what you have available. Another thing that I wanted to say today after the press conference is Brian was in an excellent mood. Brian
was he was in a good mood.
And I want to take the opportunity to say two things. One, I thought it was great that he immediately came off and said this was a successful season. I would absolutely agree that it was a successful season. It was a successful season because of the title that you got, because of the way the team performed, because coming into the season, both you and I sat in this exact same table and said, look, this team needs to be better offensively. They need to score more goals. That was achieved. You were able to bring in real players from your academy and your Tacoma Defiance team and make them not just contributors, but key pieces of this season. So to me, there's just so much more positives that 2025 left than I think people tend to see. But I am more than happy to admit when I was wrong than most. And I'll sit here and admit that I was wrong when it came to Brian Smetzer. The season before this one had said that I thought that the tank was empty and that there was need for change before he got his extension, right before the playoffs that they end up obviously getting through farther than I thought they would, and then they lose to LAFC in the Western Conference Championship. Because I've always against the Galaxy, sorry. I've always said that there is a expiration date on coaches and how far their ability to influence the team goes. And I thought that it was done. And I thought that the team could look and maybe move on. And, I questioned whether his job was on the hot seat. And I didn't really know that he could put it together again. And he did that. again, this is not something he admitted because we asked him. I don't know if he reinvented himself or not, but the way he coached this team this season, to me, reflected a coach that still has what's left in the tank, and I think that he could continue to be successful.
That is a good observation, because I think it is something that we can easily overlook. If you look back to where he was with his job 18 months ago, when they were starting slow last year, and we were asking Adrian Hanauer about Brian Schmetzer's job security.
Yes.
And it was an open question. And I think a lot of us who covered the team were seeing signs of maybe
exhaustion a little bit.
Yeah, it was maybe looking like he had maybe burned it. Like he was running out of ideas a little bit. And I've said this before, but I'll say it again. This was easily the most impressive coaching job he's ever done. I don't think he was realistically in the running for Coach of the Year because they just didn't do enough in the regular season. But, if they had gotten 5 more points this year, I think he would have been in the running for Coach of the Year.
Yeah, there was a point. I thought that there was a point.
I did too. Like, coming out of Leagues Cup, I thought there was a real chance that he might win Coach of the Year. But, he did a great job this year. I think the Sounders, the coaching staff seems to be in a really good place right now. I think the one area that they need to improve, and this is, they kind of mentioned this, is that part of what makes this offseason tricky is it really does feel like the one area you need to improve is on something that you can improve with more attention to detail, and that's set piece defending. If this team was a little bit better on set piece defending, they would probably be in MLS, the Western Conference Final right now.
I would agree. I would absolutely agree.
And you just don't blow it up because of it. Like, that's not a good reason to blow up the roster.
You know what? That brings up a great point, because I will admit that I have a really serious problem. It might be a disease, but I found myself over the weekend. I had some alone time, and there was times where I couldn't go to sleep, and I ended up watching the 2-2 between the Galaxy and the Sounders all over again. Geez. The Colorado. I went back and looked at those games where the Sounders gave up the lead, and unfortunately, I came up with a very simplistic idea of how they can fix that. But I do think that Christian Roldan, as great as he was all season by standards of his play and his durability and his defensive effort, but either Christian needs to maybe step up a lot more on that vocalness of being that leader on the field, or someone else needs to help him. But there were many of times where if you pause that LA Galaxy game where they're about to throw the ball in and people are on the wrong side of the ball, there was nobody that was saying, guys, what are we doing? Get back, move. It was kind of like this mute moment where nobody was talking. And again, this might sound simplistic, but I saw the same thing against Austin. And again, this is terrible that I'm watching these games all over again. But it's sick. No, I feel like I'm sick. But I really do feel I came to that conclusion. I just wanted to know what it was that this team can change, because again, it's not necessarily the roster or the talent, or we see Andy Rose. How long do we see Andy Rose practicing set pieces? He's out there like a madman, right? So I just wanted to know what it was, and the only conclusion that I could come up with is that is a little bit more leadership,
little tweaks,
little tweaks to just communication,
a little bit.
Absolutely, somebody else helping out Christian.
Yeah, that
in those moments when the game is on the line, you remind everybody that is go 100%, is alert. We just need to be ready, right? So yeah, I don't know why I started with that, but there it is.
I think that's and I think that's in some ways what makes this a very frustrating offseason to look at, because I think you're right. I think the difference between where the team is now and where they could be is just tightening the screws, just kind of doing some routine maintenance and things that maybe got a little bit neglected are areas that can be fixed. And they're not that far. They aren't. Like that's not, it would be more fun to sit here and say a lot of stuff can be like, these are the obvious ways that they can get better. If they can just get a number 9, if they can just get a number 10, if they can just get a number 6, whatever you want to say, that would be a lot more satisfying and a lot easier to rant and rave about. But I don't think that's the answer. I think, this was Christian's first year as a first full season as a six, and as essentially like he's probably going to be the captain next year. And that's an area where they could improve. Where he can take that sort of more vocal leadership role, and he can be the guy who says we cannot have the whole team on the wrong side of the ball the way we did at the end of the Galaxy game. We cannot have numbers committed forward against Austin. We have to close down, we like little things. These are little things. We can't let a guy get loose on the back post when we're up a man.
Yeah, or against New York, we can't allow Paul Rothberg to take that free kick as quickly as he did when New York City FC is on the attacking and pressing you as high as they are, when you could just let that ball roll, allow your team to just push them back by just letting them out. There were just little moments that I do feel like are very correctable. And a lot of it does have to do, in my humble opinion, with a couple of guys on the field that are wary, that have this really high IQ, the way I know Christian does. And it's all about field awareness and awareness of where the game is at the specific moment in time. But all of that is just to add on to what you just said. I think that there is something here. We were just asked where I think this team could be next season. And I don't flinch to say that I do believe that this team has the capability to be one of the top 3 teams in the Western Conference with what they have, with what I think that they're going to be able to add on. And obviously the bigger things are still to come, right? 2027 is going to be a huge year for the Sounders. There's expiring contracts to a guy like Albert Rusnak. There is options to a guy like Jesus Ferreira, Jordan Morris. There's a whole bunch of things that are coming up. That's when this team is going to be looking into changing a lot of things. New calendar, new way of doing business. That's when things really get convoluted, and you could honestly say, maybe this year they're going to do it differently. Maybe this year you have to do a little bit more than you did before. There's just a lot of question marks going into those seasons. But as of right now, as of what we're looking at directly for next season, man, I think that there is a really good product that's there for the Sounders.
Yeah, and those are 2027 questions.
Correct.
And I think those are big. This could have been a very different press conference if we had anyone here that could talk about the ownership situation.
Yes.
But there wasn't anyone here to talk about the ownership situation. So that's something that's going to have to wait. We learned literally nothing about that. So we didn't really get into that. And that is something else that is going to be hanging over this team most likely next offseason. And those will be some interesting questions. We will most likely be having a very different conversation at this point next year, but for right now, this is how it is, and I don't think it's a bad place to be. Like I am actually optimistic about how things are shaping up for next year. I think there's a very good reason to think that they can improve on the margins and see a real improvement in the standings.
Yeah, and I'm just excited to see the development of certain players. And again, this doesn't mean that the team can have a bad season. I mean, there's injuries, there's a whole bunch of things. But when you truly look at what they have available, I think that's fair. But you want to talk about a pivotal season? We'll talk about it at the end of 2026. That'll be a pivotal season. Potentially new ownership or additional ownership.
Right.
And, what that's going to look like in terms of calendar. I mean, for all we know, Mark Cuban's going to come grab this team and put a stadium on top of the Space Needle. I don't know. I'm just saying that, that there are things that you can talk about.
Stadium in the cloud. Cloud City. I like that.
So yeah, I mean, I'm just, obviously there is a lot of things to look at, but in this press conference, overall, I saw a coach that is confident in what he was able to build.
Yeah.
I saw a GM that is maybe wary, and maybe we should talk a little bit about Obed Vargas, because I did press him on the Obed Vargas situation
that was
bit.
Weird. Yeah, it almost feels like it could be a whole episode. But yeah, the Obed, the one thing he seemed frustrated by, and the one time he looked kind of like a little annoyed, was when you pressed him on the Obed Vargas situation, and he tried to play it off like he doesn't care if, like, he's not worried.
Like it's not a big deal.
Like it's not a big deal if Obed were to walk on a free. which I don't believe at all.
He made it sound like there was no way that it was going to happen. Almost, he was just like, "Oh well, I'd have to see if it happens." Well, that's why I'm asking, because I don't know. Are you concerned? There is a possibility. There is a potential, and I would think that it would be catastrophic to allow a guy like Owen Vargas to walk away on a free, right?
It would be bad. It would be bad. But again, that's a maybe a later episode, because we don't have a lot of we didn't get any new information other than Craig being sort of defiant about the idea that it's even a concern.
Yeah. And when it comes
which
to,
I don't believe is actually how he feels.
Right. And what I'm hearing as well, just to add on a couple of things on what we heard, I don't know if you want to go over the list of those who are walking or that did not get their option picked up. But it sounds like Castro is a guy that ultimately could easily come back. When it comes to these sort of decisions, you're also allowing guys to go look for better offers, right? If you decline to offer on a guy like Jacob Castro or Leo Burney, I think Leo maybe not so much, because he just had a hard time being on the field. So that's one that I thought that was not going to go. I think Joe Pablo's one to monitor. I do believe, and you heard Brian talk about, he could potentially be back with the club at a different aspect of the game.
Right.
So I think, coaching or whatever it is, that could happen. But when it comes to Jacob Castro, I think that he's a guy that, there's always potential to come back. Stephen Fry, obviously.
Yeah, they seem to leave the door open for Steph Fry to return. Who else was? So Ryan Kent, they closed the door on. The only mildly surprising player that they picked up was Kim Keehee, who I guess his option must have been more reasonable than I had assumed. Travian Sousa, they let go. Travian Sousa went on loan to FC Tulsa of the USL Championship. He played for the championship of the championship. They lost in a penalty shootout, but he's not going to be back. And I would assume the door is he's a little on the older side for a developmental player. He didn't get any first team minutes last year. That's a tough one for him. Trying to think who else.
No, that's about it. Yeah, obviously Paul Rothrock's going to be able to look at things. Jonathan Bell's in talks with Austin FC. There've been a couple of clubs that are out there interested in him. Now it's about figuring out where best fit and compensation wise goes, but I think that he's a player that brings a lot to the table.
Yeah, I like Jonathan Bell. I thought he was for a player they got for free.
Absolutely,
he was great. And I would have loved to. I'm sure the Sounders would have been happy to bring him back at a certain number. It's just that the number that they were offering probably does not match up with the numbers that he's hoping to get.
That is exactly it. So Jay Bell's the other one, the only other one that we haven't quite talked about, that I think he's definitely out the door. And Kim's is interesting only because he's getting surgery on that anomaly, I guess you call it, the calf thing, and
he's a little.
He's a little older, right? But he's coming back on a
probably veteran
minimum. So it is somewhere where you could be like, okay, I get it. It's a guy that came in this season and worked. I don't think that he had any moments that he made me doubt why he came back. He's a good guy on the training field, on the group, on the locker room guy. I mean, I've heard nothing but great things about Kim from absolutely everybody in this club. Egoless, absolutely. So when we talk about a team that drives on collective play and kind of that cemented group, I absolutely like the idea of bringing him back.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's probably a good place to wrap this up. Niko, once again, thank you. I'm sure we'll be talking this offseason. I just don't want to get people's expectations that we're going to be doing this on a weekly basis or anything. But we will have episodes. I will have episodes. I have an interview with Andrew Wisnowski. He's a sports lawyer who used to work for the league. We're going to talk about the upcoming CBA fight that's going to be coming up. So we'll have lots of little things like that. But this is probably the last of the sort of regular shows. But Niko, this has been a blast doing this with you. Looking forward to talking this offseason and, of course, doing this next year. People can follow you on Blue Sky at El Rolo NW. I assume, are you still doing Lobbing Scorchers in the offseason? What's the plan for that?
Yes, I think that, yes, Ari said that we're going to be doing something next week after Thanksgiving. So we're probably going to be focusing more on just the overall playoffs, to be honest, which obviously we both do cover the whole league. So that's going to be interesting because there are some damn good games happening there. God, I still can't believe that Miami's still in it. I've been doubting them over and over again. They keep shutting my mouth. But yeah, so we're going to be doing that. But no, I love it. Thank you, man, for doing this. I absolutely love and enjoy. It's my favorite show to make, without a doubt, is this one, what we learned this season. I really do. I absolutely love it. I feel like it's a brand that people want to hear, and that just makes me happy. It's somewhere that we've never done, but I've always felt like you and I would talk probably more than we should after training when we're supposed to be doing other stuff, and then we never put it on wax on tape, and now we are. So I'm glad that this is it. But yeah, definitely the last one of the year, but sure. And if there's anything that I could find as well, where I will be doing some off-season stuff, I'm going to be reaching out to some former players as well. Nice. So if we're able to do something together, that'd be fun. Great.
Well, with all that said, we're going to get out of here. I am Jeremiah Shan, signing off for Niko Moreno. No Sadietes, which is part of the Sounder Heart Podcast Network. We'll catch you next time.
Let's go Sounders.